Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents How to Be a Badass Witch 3 by Michael Anderle, narrated by Holly Adams. Chapter 1. James flexed his hands and cracked his knuckles. Showtime. He stood with Mother LeBlanc amid the red rocks in the blinding sunshine, watching two black SUVs come to a halt in front of them. Beyond, the city of Las Vegas glimmered, an oasis in the middle of the desert. The vehicle in the rear stayed closed. Presumably, it was full of auxiliary agents whose function was to guard against any attempt by the two thaumaturgists to escape. The doors of the one in front opened, though, and out stepped a pair of agents, a man and a woman. In his head, James had built up a mental image of what the feds would look like. Tall, perhaps, but certainly imposing, built like athletes, grim and exuding an air of competence. His vision had been influenced by popular media. Whatever the case, it was wrong. Both agents were average, unremarkable-looking individuals, 30-ish, with conservative haircuts. The woman's hair was auburn, the man's sandy brown. Each was of middling height for their respective sex. Moreover, they didn't look grim. They were smiling wryly. They stopped several yards from James and Mother LeBlanc, and James felt his companion's amusement radiating through the air. She gave no outward sign of it, however.
"Hello."
The male agent nodded at both of them.
"Agent Tom Richardson, FBI."
The woman beside him nodded as well.
"Agent Heidi MacDonald." "James Lovecraft,"
James said.
"Nice to meet you, Richardson and MacDonald."
He was trying not to laugh. Being a slight, bespectacled man in his mid-30s, he probably didn't look the way they expected either. LeBlanc raised her hand in greeting.
"You may call me Mother LeBlanc," she said gravely. "Good day."
James noticed that the agents seemed to take Mother LeBlanc more seriously than they took him. He was not surprised. She was a black woman who looked only 25 or so, though she was far older, in truth, and she always wore a voluminous, multicolored dress whose folds and swirls were both attention-grabbing and concealing. Though her appearance was disarming in some ways, she likely was closer to how most people might picture a miracle worker, and her New Orleans accent didn't hurt. Agent Richardson cleared his throat.
"That was an impressive display back there at the Wells Fargo Tower. I've seen a lot of weird shit in my line of work, but I never expected to see actual magic."
His eyes narrowed slightly,
or at least, what appeared to be magic.
MacDonald shot a sharp glance at her partner, then looked at James and LeBlanc again.
"We'd like to know more about how you pulled that off, the nature of your abilities, and how the incident might be related to a recent string of incidents that have popped up on our radar, so to speak."
James considered how to respond. LeBlanc did not waste that time.
"Thaumaturgy,"
she said simply.
"The working of miracles. We draw upon the divine ruling powers of the universe to effect things that would not otherwise be possible. It is a reduced tradition, but it still lives."
The agents blinked. James nodded.
"Now that she has explained, we have our own question. Why are you interested?"
It was rhetorical and not. Any person would be fascinated by the revelation that magic was real, but James was genuinely interested to know what the FBI hoped to do with this knowledge. The agents looked at one another, then back at the two thaumaturgists.
"Well," Richardson pointed out, "it allowed you to stop a major bank robbery with relative ease. That seems useful."
"And we have reason to believe you're not the only ones who can do this," MacDonald added.
"Such as, for instance, the person who was robbing that bank.
But many other unexplained phenomena have come to our attention very recently, and there might be some loose cannons out there. We're interested in securing your cooperation to contain the situation, so as to ensure that no one gets hurt." The thaumaturgists briefly locked eyes again. James took point.
"Pardon me, Agent, but was that a veiled threat?"
MacDonald frowned. "No, it was a legitimate request for aid."
"What we want is to contain a potentially explosive situation," Richardson added, "and figure out what the hell is going on. If you can appreciate our position, there's no need for threats."
"Ah," Mother LeBlanc clarified warmly. "So you are not threatening us yet."
Her smile remained, but James doubted that anyone would pick a fight with her after seeing her expression. There was a pause.
"Our role is to protect our citizens," Agent Richardson said finally, "and we take that very seriously. We don't want that to be accomplished under duress. But if you're asking if we'll use any means at our disposal to find out what's going on and protect innocent lives, the answer is yes."
"I see."
Mother LeBlanc looked at each of them in turn.
"And what exactly do you think you can do if we decide to decline your offer?"
The agents bristled slightly. Their self-control was good, but not perfect. James smiled at them. "Oh, sure. If you decide to throw half the heavily armed, scary government guys in the country against us, it will make our lives more difficult. But that's not to say your victory would be guaranteed. You saw what happened back there." The agents were not happy, that much was clear.
"We would be willing to agree to an equal partnership to accomplish our shared goals," James said simply. "But we are not interested in being deputized by you or under your control in any way."
"What would you say are our shared goals?" MacDonald looked at James and LeBlanc as if hoping to find a breach in their unity. The breeze whipping across the desert ruffled her hair.
"We ourselves were in the process of tracking down several individuals who displayed magical potential," LeBlanc explained. "We want to ensure that none of them are unstable. That is, in part, to divert excessive attention from thaumaturgists, but also out of compassion for persons in the grip of powers they don't understand, or others whom they might unintentionally harm."
"So, we do share goals," Richardson said. "We both wish to make sure that those powers will not harm innocent civilians."
He looked over their heads at the Phantom.
"Has it just been the two of you driving a Rolls-Royce all over the country?"
Mother LeBlanc nodded before James could say anything. He was busy bristling at the application of the word just to his beloved Phantom.
"Then perhaps our resources could help you to move around more efficiently," Richardson suggested. "Of course, we'd like a certain amount of information sharing in return."
Negotiations began in earnest, and the four gradually reached an accord. The thaumaturgists would offer a baseline explanation of how their powers worked. They would also permit limited observation in exchange for the FBI's assistance in containing and covering up problems or awkward incidents. Largely, they were in agreement, with one notable exception. As they prepared to go back to their respective vehicles, MacDonald said smoothly, "And, of course, it would be beneficial to have an organized program in place to develop those latent talents. The last thing we want is to be involved in some kind of super soldier program." James had to give her credit for upselling, but he wasn't going to agree to something so harebrained. She was suggesting precisely what thaumaturgists had feared for the past century or more.
"Indeed," Mother LeBlanc agreed. "If that were your true goal, We'd have no choice but to wipe your memories clean.
Her eyes flicked over the group.
You all would be left standing on this hill without the slightest idea of why you're here or of anything that has happened in the last 2 days.
James could only think of the agent's resulting expressions as deer in the headlights.
No, Richardson said hastily. Of course that's not what we meant. MacDonald was simply saying that we think magicians, thaumaturgists, should be trained how to do things right if they're going to practice magic. Surely it doesn't help anyone if more of them turn out to be bank robbers.
James allowed his face to break into a shit-eating grin.
Indeed.
The two groups took their leave of one another for the night, the FBI agents promising to play down what had occurred in Las Vegas, and all of them agreeing to set out the next morning for Los Angeles.
They do have a point,
LeBlanc said to James as they drove away.
If everyone in the country, or the world, who has the aptitude was exposed to real magic, the planet might change forever. If we have touched off a sea change, we'll need to find some way to handle it.
James grimaced.
If so, we can only hope that changes for the better. Anyway, first thing, I want to get a mechanic to look at the car. A close second is, before we worry about everyone else, we need to finish tracking down all the people who read that goddamn book of ours.
James, that's the first priority, not the second.
We're not setting out until tomorrow morning, James pointed out. I have time.
Very well. But if it's out of commission, we go without it.
James grinned. It'll be back in fine form by then. This is one of those times when having boatloads of money really pays off.
I think that's most times.
You're not wrong. I don't know what it is, but something about animal fat makes it much more satisfying than other forms of nutrition.
Ted looked down at his empty plate and sighed happily.
Especially in the morning.
Uh-huh.
Christian stared down at his own plate and tried to muster an appetite. A month ago, the two of them had found a greasy spoon that could best be described as a place designed to cure hangovers. The coffee was unusually strong, the pancakes were the size of hubcaps, and the thick breakfast sandwiches featured homemade bread. The two men had vowed to return only when circumstances demanded a strong pick-me-up. That day had arrived. As Christian pushed his food around with his fork, Ted raised an eyebrow.
You suck, by the way.
Christian groaned and sank his face into one hand.
Don't. Ted ignored that. You've been getting on my case about having a drinking problem because I had a bit too much to drink one time at the Mermaid. And now you can't remember any of your dates with one of the hottest women in California.
Ted jabbed a fork at his friend.
Oh, come on, give me your pancakes if you're not going to eat them.
Christian shoved his plate across the table and dropped his head onto his crossed arms.
Drink your coffee, Ted advised. If I do, will you have mercy until it kicks in? Fine.
Christian raised his head and pulled his cup over. He added liberal amounts of sugar and cream, then drank the thing down in one long, scalding pull. TV sets had been installed in the upper corners of the walls near the ceilings, and the one facing Christian's and Ted's booth was currently playing a repeat of the morning news. They'd ignored it for the most part, but during the brief silence, something grabbed their attention. "And next," declared the newscaster, "we have an update on the ongoing story of LA's new superhero, as everyone seems to be calling him." Chris looked up, bleary-eyed, and focused on the image.
"Oh, God,"
he mumbled. Ted craned his neck to examine the screen, too.
"Oh, that crap again. Didn't they find out that he's actually a gangster or some shit?"
His friend shrugged. The woman with the microphone, her face pleasantly neutral, continued. The individual known as Motorcycle Man has continued to confound both authorities and the local community. Some call him a hero. Others say he's a vigilante who has done more harm than good by interfering in situations better handled by the police. The segment cut to a brief interview with a dark silhouette in a shadow room, which the caption identified as an LAPD officer speaking on condition of anonymity. "Frankly," he began in an electronically distorted voice, "we're flummoxed by the whole situation. The signs are pointing to this individual being involved in the recent uptick in gang wars, and he is probably affiliated with the so-called L.A. Witches. The strange thing is, no one ever heard of them before 2 weeks ago. We have contacts in law enforcement all over the United States and even internationally in Canada, Mexico, and Europe, and none of them have any idea who those people are. No leads, no answers." Ted shook his head as he stared at the screen. "People used to say L.A. was the city where all the crazy people gravitated, but I'm pretty sure we've crossed the craziness event horizon by this point. Superhero gang members? Are we still living in real life, or is this an evil virtual reality simulation or something?" Christian felt a faint rumbling in his brain, and he raised his fingers and massaged his temples, trying to think. The coffee was helping, but there was still a dense fog over his mental processes. He knew that he knew something, but he didn't know what. Or did he? It was as though he was supposed to have knowledge to contribute to the subject of Motorcycle Man, but he'd inadvertently blotted it out by drinking too much. Except that he hadn't drunk much lately. Or had he? Ted refilled Christian's cup of coffee from the insulated pitcher on the table. Then he pushed the plate of pancakes back, having not eaten any of it yet. "Thanks," Christian said. He cut a bite of pancake, stared at it for a moment to gather his strength, and then shoved it in his mouth. He swallowed, suppressing his stomach's inclination to roll over with an effort, and then sighed. "I'm confused all the time lately. The whole city is going crazy. Work is as ridiculous as ever. And I have only the vaguest idea of what's going on with Kira. Like, I remember my plan for when I'd meet up with her, but..." Ted looked at him askance. "You could call her." Christian grimaced. "I could, but for whatever reason, I feel like I shouldn't." "Call it a hunch." He shook his head. "And that's the problem. Everything feels like hunches now. I can't remember why I think anything." He resisted the urge to pound the table with his fist out of pure frustration. "I've never gotten blackout drunk in my life, and all of a sudden, there's a night that's just missing. I don't have a hangover, I swear, He didn't have the words to describe this, or how terrifying it was. His thoughts skittered away from certain topics, while parts of last night were a complete blank. He couldn't remember going out to dinner or having a drink. He couldn't remember anything. Then his phone buzzed. Blinking, he pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from none other than Kira. Christian read it, and his mouth dropped open. He could not keep himself from responding out loud. "What the hell?" Kira sat at the small dining table in the warehouse she had converted into an apartment. She was perfectly still, and her eyes were fixed on the screen of her phone, specifically on the message she'd sent to Christian about 2 minutes ago. She sighed, read it to herself for the 6th time, and wondered if she had made the right choice. "Christian, I want you to know that I have no hard feelings about what you said last night. It was still good catching up with you, and sometime in the future I'd like us to be friends. But I don't think I can do that right now. Not for a while. I need some time. Take care. Kira." She'd performed the memory wipe spell enough times by this point to be confident that it had worked. It was still difficult to control how many of a person's recollections she deleted, so she tended to err on the side of caution. In this case, she'd asked the miraculous forces to intervene in his memories somewhere before he'd noticed her. Confusing Kevin had been one thing, a very temporary way to keep him out of danger. Wiping the memories of the gangbangers hadn't bothered her either. They'd been trying to kill her, after all. But this was far more personal, and it made her feel vaguely sick to her stomach. She couldn't think of any way around it, however. Christian would always have his friends' backs and his girlfriend's back. He wouldn't let her go into danger without help and support. This meant that if she kept trying to date him and use her powers, he was going to get hurt eventually. To pretend otherwise was to put his life in danger. Even if she managed to keep him from trying to help her, the odds were good that the gangs would track him down. She refused to be the reason for his painful death. She wasn't going to be able to forgive herself for asking him out or for getting him embroiled in this mess when she knew there was something weird going on. But at least she'd done the right thing now. Funny how the phrase "the right thing" made her want to scream, cry, and vomit everywhere. She didn't think she would ever forgive someone who had wiped her memory for her own safety. But it was probably better if Christian never forgave her. In the meantime, it was better if Christian thought he was the one who'd called this off. If he and Ted believed Kira had called things off, they might hang around and refuse to accept defeat. No, it was better if she dropped off Chris's radar for the foreseeable future. So many things could go wrong, and she wasn't sure she had it in her to make sure they went right. Kira stood, left her phone on the table, and trudged over to the refrigerator. She was always hungry these days. Even now that she had learned how to channel magic only when doing a spell, she was still using an incredible amount of energy. Like any athlete, she needed to replenish that energy. She'd dropped a lot of weight quickly and wanted to get things back under control. The first stop on that train was ensuring her ribs did not stick out anymore. She opened the fridge door, pulled out 3 armloads of food one by one, and took it all back to the table. About half of it was leftover Korean and Italian food made for her by Mrs. Kim. The rest was an amalgamation of grocery store stuff and leftover takeout. She put some of it in the microwave and started eating some of it cold. To her consternation, she could not keep her mind from drifting back to Christian. After she'd mind-wiped him, she had promised herself that she would come clean and tell him the truth of what was going on. Perhaps explain it at dinner with the Kim family to put him at ease, and so they could back her up. But no. That was how she wanted things to be. She had to act on the way things really were. She was dabbling in powers most people had never heard of, and had taken the plunge into a world most people didn't understand. The Kims knew some of it, and they were willing to stand back. She couldn't let others get hurt on her behalf. It was the smart decision, whether she liked it or not. Her phone buzzed to tell her she had a text, and her gut tightened when she glanced at the screen. It was Christian. Scowling, she opened the message and read. Christian was confused as to what she meant, but he was restrained and respectful, asking for clarification and agreeing that he held no hard feelings either. Kira's hand balled into a fist. If he'd been a dickhead about it, cutting him off would have been easier. She started typing a response. Christian, you told me you didn't think it would work out. I can understand why you wouldn't want to. She stopped, deleted everything, and thought it over. Christian, you don't have to play nice. I know you're not interested in me. Maybe you're having second thoughts, but... She deleted that too. Kira sighed and rubbed her face. She left the phone sitting where it was and went back to her meal. Proper nutrition might be exactly what she needed right now. By the time 80% or so of the food was gone, she was crying. Again. Damn it! This wasn't fair. She knew it was the right decision, so why couldn't she make her heart understand that? She had no desire to spend the rest of her life alone. Yet, the way things had been going, having people close to her was an invitation to catastrophe. Kira exhaled and looked at the rest of the food. She didn't really feel like eating, but she needed all the calories she could get. The important thing was to do what had to be done, not what she wanted to do. Kira tossed her phone on the far side of her bed, where it slid under her pillow, and tore into the last of her private banquet, staring at the far wall. Chapter 2. What happened the other night, Pauline Smith said, was unacceptable, not to mention embarrassing. Johnny Torres kept his face stony, but the muscles along his jaw tightened. His black hair was slicked back and his fingers drummed on the table. He adjusted his tie. He was of average height and lean build, and he had learned long ago that it generally suited his purposes if people underestimated his intelligence. For instance, Pauline had recently decided that Johnny's handling of a business rival had been insufficient and sloppy. She had taken on the planning role in an attempt to show him and the two other members of their team that she had what it took to lead, and he did not. Her own efforts had also failed miserably. Several groups of local gang members had fought a single member of the L.A. Witches at her instigation and failed to take her out. Johnny wished they'd managed to take the little bitch out, but he knew it was good in the long run for Pauline to see that she wasn't more competent than he was. He wasn't failing at an easy task, as she had first assumed. An unexpected side effect of the whole thing was that he was developing a certain respect for Pauline. He'd thought she was a lunatic in the early days of this gang, insisting they wear suits, going after yuppie office workers. But it turned out she had more of a bloodthirsty streak than he'd guessed. "We need to act decisively," Pauline said, and raised her chin. "As the newest group, we are a convenient scapegoats for the other gangs, so they have decided to blame the L.A. Witches' ascendance on us. Accordingly, they are doing everything in their power to keep a low profile and have informed us that they will not help." Johnny glowered. Beside him, Leah and Sven looked like they thought they should say something, but they weren't sure what. "We knew this would not be easy," Pauline told them. "A new social order always faces resistance. I simply did not believe it would start so soon. If anything, I see this as an indication of our success." Johnny's eyebrows shot up. Every time he thought Pauline was making sense, she managed to throw a little extra crazy into the mix. "We knew that we would need to show the city what we can do." Pauline was standing taller now. Her eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep, but she did not allow her exhaustion to creep into her posture or speech. "We have the opportunity to do that now. We face an enemy all of the other gangs know they cannot defeat. We will defeat them and establish ourselves at the top of the hierarchy. Is that understood?" Everyone nodded. "So, what is step 1? Pauline asked them. She was waiting for a specific answer. "Research?" Leah tried finally. "Yes. We need information about what these L.A. witches can do and what works against them." Pauline crossed her arms. "So?" "So, we find some cannon fodder and see what works," Johnny said bluntly. Pauline smiled. "Where are we going to find cannon fodder?" Sven objected. "The other gangs won't work with us." "None of the top ones," Johnny said. "But there are always a few wannabe badasses who need a little extra cash." Pauline nodded. "Exactly. I want a list from each of you with 10 suggestions for tactics or technology to try against the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?